Hey everyone, I've been on a lovely Marshall kick lately and decided I want to show you some of the amps I got and some of the tones I'm using them for. And in my opinion, Marshalls are like the heads for thrash metal, old school stuff, 80s and 90s and everything. So I figured I'd just, show some thrash tones from them. This is by no means a scientific test at all, so I'm not reamping a very consistent performance or anything. I'm just grabbing this guitar, it's an 88 Gibson Les Paul Custom with EMG 57 pickups, and just jam a few shittily played riffs through each of those amps. And I didn't try to set them up to sound really similar or anything, because that would be unfair, because, well, if I set up one amp to sound awesome and then try to match that tone with the other amps, it's always going to be a good copy at best. So just set up each amp to what I thought sounded good for the amp and what I enjoyed playing through. So that also means that if you prefer one amp and don't like another amp, that doesn't mean that you necessarily wouldn't like the amp that you don't like the sound of in this clip. So take this comparison with a grain of salt. Same for gain, like some amps have loads of gain, some have barely any gain. So if you're a gain freak, you might not really like the sound of the clips with less gain and vice versa. So again, it's just my taste, but it should still give you some sort of an idea of what the amps sound like. And they all got the typical Marshall grind to them, I think. I'm using this lovely Maxon OD808 overdrive with the level all the way up and the overdrive all the way down, just to add some low-end tightness. Except for the 2203 models, which don't have enough gain, I raised the drive to about noon, just to add some more gain. Yeah, that should be it. If you want to jump to the audio clips directly, just check the description here. There's going to be, for each amp, like a time. You click on that and it takes you to the intro, where I talk about the amp and just briefly at least. And then there's going to be a second one. If you click on that, it's going to take you to the audio clip directly. So you can jump from one audio to the next to compare directly. And as I said, this is not a scientific test at all. It's not complete at all. It's missing a lot of amps, I know that. Thing is, I don't own all the amps Marshall actually ever offered or sold. And I can only, show you the amps I got, unless you want to send me some stuff. I always like stuff. Also, yeah, it's just a representation of my taste. So feel free to think that it sounds shit, or that you would have dialed in less treble or more bass or more mids. There's no way I'm gonna be able to match everyone's taste. So this is just what I like from each amp and what I like to play through. And if you enjoy this, give it a thumbs up, like a like, or subscribe, or share the video. That would be awesome. If not, just move on. And yeah, I enjoyed making it, so maybe it's got some useful information for you too. Take care. First up is the 1978 2203 JMP head, which is exactly the same as the early 80s JCM 800 2203 heads. The later 800s got fewer amounts of filter caps and some other changes later down the line when they converted to horizontal inputs. But this is the same head as the JCM 100 you're going to be hearing later. This particular one I converted to KT88 tubes just to have another flavor. But it's, essentially the same amp. It doesn't have loads of gain on tap. So I'm using some drive from the Tube Screamer for this one, to about 12 o'clock. drive pedals and distortion pedals are one way to get more gain, but a lot of people in the 80s had their amps modded, and there were different ways of doing that. A lot of them involved like drilling holes, adding tubes, adding gain stages, and one pretty unique thing was the Soldano Hotmod. It's just like a plug and play mod. The regular 12AX7 is like a dual triode tube, so it's got two gain stages. And this one is a triple triode. It's got one more gain stage. And it's got a little like circuit in there. So all you need to do is to get rid of the second preamp tube, plug this one in, and you've got an additional gain stage, more gain, and you don't have to drill any holes, do any changes to the amp. It sounds great. They weren't that reliable and quite expensive to make, so they discontinued them. You can still sometimes find them on eBay for around $200, and here's how it sounds. So this is the same JMP 2203 with the same settings as before, except for gain, which are reduced from all the way up first to 6 now. And the drive on the tube screamer pedal on the Maxon OD808, that's what I'm using, is turned all the way down again. Yeah, when the 80s started, Marshall put their old late 70s heads into new head shells. And, well, this is what most people think a Marshall looks like. And it became like the head for most of the 80s stuff, thrash metal and all the glam rock stuff. And it still doesn't have a lot of gain. It's the same amp, basically. So I'm going to be hitting this one with the tube screamer again with the 808. And again, adding a little drive from the pedal. Settings are, I think, pretty much the same, or actually exactly the same as on the JMP. And Marshall themselves also heard the call for more gain and came up with a second JCM100 line, the 2210 and the 2205. One's 100 watts and the other one's 50. And this series has caused some confusion throughout the 80s because they changed the circuit quite drastically. And from like less gain and a more mid-rangey kind of tone in the early 80s, this is the 83 model by the way, to more gain and a more modern voicing in the late 80s. But it, like the early ones, like this one, already have more gain than the 2203 and 2204, the single channel brothers. Yeah, let's check this one out. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the guitarists in the 80s took their amps to the shops and had them modded to add more gain. And that's actually how a lot of the like modern high gain amp builders started out, like Dietzel and Borgner and Soldano. They did repairs and also did a lot of mods to keep up with the high gain demand of the 80s. Todd Langer, for example, was one of those heavy hitters. And this amp here is the JCM800 2204, which is the same, in its raw state, is the same as the 2203 we heard earlier. But this one has been modded by Mike Fortin in Canada, who's just an awesome dude with a great ear and a hot soldering iron. And this is the amp with the gain set to 6. With the 90s around the corner, Marshall started their JCM900 line. That one had several different models. The most commonly known one, I guess, is the high-gain dual reverb, the 5100 and 4500 model. That one actually has been reissued now, I think. And in my opinion, it's also the least good sounding one. It's got a lot of solid state clipping and it sounds very thin and buzzy to my ears. But there's also, for example, this one, the high gain master volume Mark III 2100, right, and 2500. This is the 2500, the 50 watts model. And the preamp design is very similar to the 2203 JCM800. Just this one has got a second gain stage, which is actually diode clipping. But if you turn that all the way down, you get the full all-tube JCM800 preamp essentially, with the 900 power amp, which is a bit different in its design compared to the 800. Tone is rather similar though. Let's check this one out. Besides the JCM900, at that time there were some more amps like Slash, Signature, and Silver Jubilee, the 6100, and some other models, which I unfortunately don't have, so I can't really show them to you. But what I do have is this JCM900 SLX, which confusingly enough goes by the same model number as the previous one, 2100 for the 100 watts version and 2500 for the 50 watts one. This is the 100 watts version, and what they did with this amp is they added another tube gain stage instead of the solid state clipping stage and the one we checked out previously. And this amp has got like loads and loads and loads of gain on tap. It's also voiced slightly darker than the other Marshalls, so I raised the presence a little bit, and it's quite compressed sounding. It's got some nice squishiness to it, which I really like. It's great for lead work, but it's also brutal for death metal and thrash metal rhythm tones. The early 2000s essentially brought two new models from the JCM2000 line. The triple super lead 3-channel head and the dual super lead, the DSL. The TSL, in my opinion, well, is the less awesome one. It's got a more brittle, thinner, solid state distortion kind of sound. And the DSL is actually a fucking beast of an amp. It's got 2 channels with 2 voicings or gain stages, so yeah, 4 different gain settings if you like. And it's got this deep switch, which adds a lot of low bass without, it's a bit thinner than the other amps. The new versions, they just, well, it's not in a reissue, but well, the new DSL versions they came out with now have got a depth pot instead of the deep switch, which I think is a great idea. But loving this one. It's got a brutal distortion. It's great for all sorts of death metal and thrash as well. Kind of like the SLX, similar amounts of distortion as well. Just this one sounds a bit more controlled, a bit less compressed in your face, but it's still, well, quite brutal. Let's hear. Yeah, and for quite a while, Marshall hadn't come out with anything new that piqued the metal guitarist's interest. Just a lot of reissues and old stuff and small micro wattage amps. And at some point, the JVM 410 was introduced, which is a versatile beast with 4 channels, 3 modes each, and loads and loads and loads and loads of gain on tap. And the 2 main channels for us metal guys would be the Overdrive 1 and Overdrive 2, obviously. OD1 has got a more classic Marshall voicing, OD2 similar but a bit more modern. And this is OD2 in the Ember mod, which is like the second highest gain stage. There's also Red, which would have more gain. This is like the orange channel, and it's got loads of gain, and it's with a gain set to 12 o'clock now. So we're now leaving the all-tube amp range, and I'm gonna be checking this guy out. I think it's late 90s or early 2000s when Marshall tried to jump on the nu metal train. This is the Mode 4. It's got a solid state, like MOSFET power amp, 350 watts I think, and it's got 2 separate preamps, like amps essentially. Amp number 2 is the nu metal amp. It's got way too much boomy as shit bass and fizzy highs, and it's fucking unusable. And amp number 1, it's more like a JCM800 kind of vibe, and that one sounds really good actually. So let's check out amp number 1 and never talk about amp 2 again. And then there was this other infamous solid state line that Marshall came out with, the Valvestates. And that line got a very bad name, mainly because almost all the amps sucked absolute donkey scrotum, except for the 8100 and what's the other one, I think 8200, the bi-chorus. And that one's actually a really, really, really good amp. The problem with this amp is it's not very reliable. The circuit board is rather thin and the traces break and stuff. At least that's what I heard. Mine never broke and it sounds great. It's got the tightest low end. It's fantastic to blend with another bigger sounding amp like a rectifier or something in the studio for extra tight low end. I think Meshuggah used it a lot. Chuck from Death used it, and a lot of other bands. And it's a killer amp. You can find it cheap and it sounds great. And if you can look past the Valvestate name, you're going to be rewarded with a really, really good sounding amp. So let's check it out.